Hey there, folks. Yes, I'm talking to you, my fellow retirees who thought we'd earned a little peace after all those years of hard work. I'm Alex Harper, 68 years old. And let me tell you something that'll make your blood boil right from the get-go. Last month, the HOA I don't even belong to marched onto my family's land and chopped down my 140-year-old trees. Trees that stood taller than my granddad's tallest tales. Can you imagine that? 1 minute, they're swaying in the Florida breeze. The next, they're nothing but stumps. And that's just the start of this nightmare. Stick with me, because if you've ever felt the sting of an overreaching HOA, this story's about to hit home harder than a summer storm. I moved to this quiet corner of Pine Hollow, Florida 2 years ago, thinking I'd spend my golden years tending my roses, walking my old mutt Rusty, and tinkering in the garage with my late wife's memory close by. This land's been in my family since the 1880s. My great-great-grandfather broke his back clearing it, and those ancient oaks were the silent witnesses to every laugh, every tear. I'm not part of any HOA. My deed says I'm free and clear, a holdout from the days before these neighborhood associations took over like some modern-day royalty. Life was good, until that fateful morning when I opened my mailbox. There it was, a crisp, white envelope. No return address, but I knew trouble when I saw it. Inside was a letter from the Pine Hollow HOA, demanding I pay a $500 maintenance fee for land I don't even live on their precious turf for. I chuckled at first, thought it was a prank, but then I called their office, and a nasally voice on the other end snapped, "Pay up, or there'll be consequences, Mr. Harper." Consequences? I'm a retired vet, not some kid they can push around. My heart sank as I hung up, staring at those majestic trees out my window, wondering what consequences could mean for a man who just wants to live out his days in peace. Now, I don't know about you, but I've dealt with my share of bullies, overseas and back home. But this felt personal. Those trees aren't just wood, they're my family's legacy. So, I'm asking you, what would you do if someone threatened to take what's yours after a lifetime of earning it? Because the next day, I found out just how far they'd go. And it's a fight I never saw coming. Stay tuned, because this retiree's about to turn the tables on these HOA tyrants. I knew I couldn't just sit there and let the HOA steamroll me like I was some pushover. So, I put on my best button-up shirt, grabbed that ridiculous letter, and marched down to the Pine Hollow HOA meeting that Tuesday night. I figured I'd set things straight. Show them I'm not part of their little club, and they've got no right to demand a dime from me. The meeting room was packed with folks, most of them looking nervous, whispering about their own HOA headaches. Then she walked in. Karen, the HOA president, strutting like she owned the whole town. She's in her 50s, all sharp suits and sharper glares, with a clipboard that might as well have been her scepter. I stood up, introduced myself, and explained my situation. How I'm not an HOA member and their fee was nonsense. Karen didn't even look at me at first, just smirked and said, "Mr. Harper, your land's an eyesore, and it's dragging down our community's value. Pay up or we'll handle it ourselves." The room went dead quiet. I felt my face heat up. This wasn't about fees, it was about control. I walked out of there knowing I'd just poked a hornet's nest, and Karen wasn't going to stop until she'd stung me good. A few days later, I woke up to the sound of chainsaws tearing through the morning air. My heart dropped. I knew exactly what was happening before I even got my boots on. I ran outside, Rusty barking at my heels, and there they were, a crew of workers in orange vests, hired by the HOA, hacking away at my 140-year-old oaks like they were nothing. I shouted, "Stop, this is my land." But the foreman waved a paper in my face, claiming the trees were on HOA property. I knew that was a lie. Those trees were planted by my great-granddad, well within our boundaries. I begged them to stop, but they wouldn't listen. One by one, those giants fell, their branches crashing down with a sound that felt like my heart breaking. I stood there, helpless, watching as decades of history turned to sawdust. When the crew finally left, Karen pulled up in her shiny SUV, smirking through her window. "Told you we'd handle it, Mr. Harper. she said, then drove off. I sank to my knees, staring at the stumps, feeling like I'd lost a piece of my soul. But as the dust settled, I clenched my fists. This wasn't over. I'd find a way to make them pay for what they'd done to my family's legacy. The next week, I got a call from my lawyer, Tom, who'd been digging into the HOA's claims. He sounded grim. "Alex, they've altered the property records," he said. "The HOA filed new documents with the county, redrawing the boundaries to claim a chunk of your land as theirs." I couldn't believe it. Those crooks were trying to steal my farm right out from under me. I drove to the county office myself, and sure enough, the new map showed my northern field, where I grow hay for my horses, now marked as HOA Common Area. I was furious, but when I went door to door to rally my neighbors, I hit a wall. Old Mrs. Jenkins down the road whispered, "I'd help Alex, but Karen fined me $1,000 last year for my grandkids' lemonade stand. I can't risk it." Others just shook their heads, too scared to speak up after years of Karen's bullying. I felt alone, like I was fighting a giant with nothing but my bare hands. That night, I sat on my porch, staring at the empty space where my trees used to stand, and I realized something. If the law wouldn't help me, I'd have to find another way. Karen thought she'd won, but she didn't know the fight I had left in me. The breaking point came a week later when I woke up to the clatter of construction equipment on my land. I threw on my coat and stumbled outside, only to find a crew erecting a chain-link fence right through my northern field, the one the HOA had stolen on paper. Worse still, they'd torn up my hay bales, scattering them like trash, and started pouring concrete for what looked like a parking lot. My chest tightened. I could almost hear my granddad's voice telling me to protect this place. I yelled at the workers, waving my deed, but the foreman shrugged. "Orders from the HOA. Take it up with them." Karen showed up mid-morning, all smug in her designer sunglasses, and said, "We're improving the community, Alex. You should thank us." Thank them? For stealing my farm and destroying my livelihood? I felt a rage I hadn't known since my Army days. I called Tom again, and he confirmed the county was dragging its feet. Some clerk with ties to Karen was stalling my appeal. The law felt like a dead end, and my neighbors still wouldn't budge, too terrified of Karen's fines and threats. That night, I sat with Rusty, staring at the half-built fence, and realized I was on my own. But then a spark hit me. Maybe I didn't have to fight alone. I remembered old Hank, my buddy from the VFW, who'd dealt with shady land grabs before. I picked up the phone, my voice steady despite the storm inside. "Hank, I need your help. They're taking my farm, and I'm not going down without a fight." His gruff laugh on the other end gave me hope. This wasn't over yet. Hank showed up the next day with a plan that made my blood pump again. He'd brought along Shirley, another vet friend, and together they suggested we turn the tables on Karen. "First, we need proof," Hank said, pulling out a beat-up laptop. "Let's dig into those property records and see what they're hiding." We spent hours online, cross-checking old deeds with the county's files, and struck gold, a 1902 land grant proving my family owned the entire parcel, including the disputed field. Shirley, with her detective background, suggested we set up hidden cameras around the property to catch any more HOA shenanigans. I nodded, feeling a flicker of the old soldier's grit I thought I'd lost. Over the next few days, I installed those cameras, my hands steady despite the ache in my joints. Then, I reached out to a local reporter I'd met at the diner, Betty, a feisty woman who loved a good scandal. I spilled everything, the tree cutting, the land grab, the stalling clerk. Betty's eyes lit up. "This could be big, Alex," she said. "Let's expose them." That night, as I watched the first footage of an HOA worker sneaking around my fence, I felt a shift. I wasn't just defending my land anymore. I was fighting for every retiree Karen had bullied. The community might be scared, but with proof and allies, I had a shot. The showdown came at the next HOA public meeting, held in the community center under flickering lights. I walked in with Hank, Shirley, and Betty, my hands clutching the 1902 deed and a USB drive full of camera footage. The room buzzed as Karen took the stage, her usual smugness on full display. I stood up, voice shaking but firm, and declared, "You cut down my 140-year-old trees and stole my land. Let's see the proof of your claims." Karen scoffed. "Your land's ours now, old man. Sign this agreement or we'll sue you dry." But before she could finish, Betty stepped forward, projecting the footage on a screen. Workers chopping trees, forging documents, and that shady clerk nodding at Karen. The crowd gasped. Karen's face went pale, but she tried to deflect. "This is fabricated!" I slammed the deed on the table. "This says different. My family's owned this since 1882. That's when the room erupted. Neighbors I'd thought were too scared, Mrs. Jenkins, Martin from down the road, stood up, shouting their own stories of Karen's fines and threats. Hank raised his voice. "This is corruption, plain and simple." The police, tipped off by Betty, arrived, and Karen's cronies started stammering. One even blurted, "She told us to fake the records." That was it. Cuffs clicked on Karen's wrists as she glared at me, her empire crumbling. The county launched an investigation, and within weeks, the HOA was dissolved, my land returned, and Karen faced charges. As I stood on my restored field, planting new saplings with my neighbors, I felt a weight lift. Betty's article ran with the headline, "Retiree Tops HOA Tyranny," and folks nodded my way with respect. "Sometimes," I said to Hank, "justice isn't in the courts, it's in us, standing together." This fight taught me that even when the law fails, community and grit can win. So, if you're facing your own HOA bully, don't back down, rally your people and fight. The real showdown unfolded a month later at a special town hall meeting, called after Betty's explosive article hit the local paper. I walked in with Hank, Shirley, and a stack of evidence, my 1902 deed, the USB with camera footage, and a petition signed by a dozen neighbors who'd finally found their courage. The room was packed, tension thick as Florida humidity. Karen strutted to the podium, her usual arrogance barely masking a flicker of unease. I stood up, my voice steady despite the knot in my stomach, and said, "You stole my land, cut my trees, and forged documents. Show me your proof, Karen." She sneered. "Your little farm's ours now, Harper. Sign this quitclaim, or we'll bury you in court." But before she could gloat, Betty cued the projector. The screen lit up with footage. Workers felling my oaks, that clerk winking at Karen as they swapped files, and night vision clips of HOA goons trespassing. The crowd gasped, murmurs turning to shouts. Karen's face drained of color, but she snapped, "This is a setup." I slammed the deed down. "This says my family owned this land since 1882. Check it." Her ally, a sweaty board member, panicked and blurted, "She told us to fake it all." That was the nail in the coffin. Two sheriff's deputies, tipped off by Shirley, stepped forward. Karen lunged for the door, but they caught her, cuffs clicking as she hissed, "You'll regret this, old man." The room erupted in cheers as she was led out, her reign of terror crumbling under the weight of truth. The county launched an immediate investigation, and I knew justice was finally within reach. In the days that followed, something beautiful happened. Neighbors who'd once avoided my gaze began knocking on my door, spilling their own tales of Karen's tyranny. $500 fines for a kid's bike, eviction threats over a cracked sidewalk. Mrs. Jenkins brought me a pie, tearfully admitting, "I was scared, Alex, but you gave us hope." Martin, the car tinkerer, organized a meeting, and soon a dozen of us were swapping stories and evidence. We formed a grassroots group, Pine Hollow Free, vowing to rebuild without HOA bullies. The local paper ran follow-ups, and even the mayor got involved, promising a review of HOA practices. Shirley and Hank rallied veterans from the VFW, their voices adding weight to our cause. For the first time, I felt the power of community, not just living side by side, but standing together. Karen's fall sparked a movement, turning whispers of fear into a chorus of defiance. Weeks later, the county ruled in my favor. The HOA was dissolved, Karen faced fraud charges, and my land was fully restored, complete with a modest compensation check. I stood on that northern field, now free of fences, and planted new saplings with my neighbors, their laughter mixing with the rustle of leaves. Rusty romped around, chasing a butterfly, and I smiled, feeling my wife's spirit in the breeze. The community pitched in to clear the concrete mess, turning it into a shared garden. Betty's final article dubbed me the tree defender, and folks tipped their hats as they passed. That night, I sat on my porch with Hank and Shirley, a cold lemonade in hand, and said, "We did it, not just for me, but for all of us." The land was mine again, but the real victory was the bond we'd forged. Karen's greed couldn't break that. This fight taught me a hard truth. Sometimes the law isn't enough to stop injustice. Karen's power came from fear and corruption, but my strength came from standing firm and rallying others. It's not just about winning back what's yours. It's about showing bullies they can't silence a united community. Age doesn't define your fight. Courage does. Whether it's a tree, a home, or your peace, don't let anyone steal it without a battle. Lean on your neighbors, dig up your proof, and never back down. Justice might be slow, but with grit and togetherness, it's unstoppable. If this story stirred something in you, share it with a friend who's battling their own HOA nightmare. Let's spread the word. Drop your own tale in the comments below. I'd love to hear how you've stood up to the bullies. Hit that like button if you're with me, and don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell for more real-life victories. Tell me where you're tuning in from. Florida, Texas, wherever. Let's build a community of fighters. Together, we can turn the tide against HOA tyrants. Stay strong, folks, and I'll see you in the next one.